The boot connected with a cardboard shelter, sending it collapsing inward like a wet lung. 16-year-old Jules gasped, scrambling backward into the mud, the freezing rain of a November night instantly soaking her thin gray hoodie. She didn't scream. She had learned a long time ago that screaming only excited the predators. "Look at this trash," a voice sneered. It was a gravelly, wet sound, like tires crunching over broken glass. Jules wiped mud from her eyes, looking up. Towering over her were three men. They wore leather cuts vests that smelled of stale beer, gasoline, and violence. On the back, an embroidered green serpent coiled around a dagger. The Snake Riders. The leader, a man with a jagged scar running through his left eyebrow and a snake tattoo winding up his neck, kicked her meager pile of belongings again. Her backpack skidded across the wet concrete under the overpass. A half-eaten package of crackers, her food for the next 2 days, burst open, crushing into the grime. "Please," Jules whispered, her voice cracking. "That's all I have." The leader, whom the others called Viper, laughed. He crouched down, his face inches from hers. He reeked of tobacco and cruelty. "This is Snake Rider territory, Rat. You pay the toll or you get crushed." He reached out and snatched the one thing Jules protected with her life, a silver locket hanging from her neck. It held the only picture of her mother she had left. "No." Jules lunged, a sudden spark of desperation overriding her fear. Viper backhanded her. It wasn't a full punch, just a dismissive slap, but it sent her sprawling into the puddle. The heavy silver jewelry dangled from his thick, gloved fingers. "Pretty silver," Viper grunted. He didn't put it in his pocket. Instead, with a cruel grin, he turned and hurled it toward the river rushing darkly beside the highway. "Oops," he mocked. Jules watched the silver glint disappear into the black water. Her heart shattered. "Let's go," Viper said, standing up and checking his watch. "We got real work to do. The Queen is alone tonight." "Easy pickings. You sure the Angels won't have guards?" one of the lackeys asked nervously. "Big Marcus is 2 towns over dealing with the cops. The clubhouse is empty except for his wife. We put a bullet in her. We sent a message. The Hells Angels crumble if their president is broken." Viper spat on the ground near Jules's head. "Leaves are changing, boys. Time for the snakes to rule." They walked away, their laughter echoing against the concrete pillars. They didn't even look back at Jules. To them, she was less than a ghost. She was debris. Jules lay in the mud, her cheeks stinging, the cold seeping into her bones. She should stay down. She should curl up and die. That's what the world wanted. You either learn to see what others miss, or you don't survive. Her father's voice, a memory from before he vanished, whispered in her ear. Jules pushed herself up. She was shivering violently, but a new fire burned in her chest. It wasn't warmth, it was rage. They took her mother's locket. They treated her like dirt. And now they were going to kill a woman just to send a message. The Queen is alone. Jules grabbed her muddy backpack. She didn't run toward the river to look for the locket. She turned toward the city lights. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't running away. She was hunting. River's Edge was a town divided by iron and ink. On the west side, the Snake Riders dealt in misery and meth. On the east side, in the industrial district, lay the territory of the Hells Angels. Jules knew the stories. The teachers at her old school, before she ran away from the abusive foster home, whispered that the Angels were trouble. They said to cross the street if you heard the rumble of a Harley. But Jules had been on the streets for 3 years. She knew that trouble was relative. The Snake Riders preyed on the weak. The Angels. She'd seen them stop traffic to let a stray dog cross the road. They were dangerous, yes, but they had a code. The Hells Angels clubhouse was a fortress of red brick and reinforced steel, an old converted warehouse that took up half a block. Usually, the front was lined with 50 gleaming motorcycles, chrome reflecting the neon beer signs. Tonight, it was ominously empty. Jules pulled her collar up, her teeth chattering. The wind cut through her wet clothes like a knife. She hid in the shadows of a derelict auto shop across the street, watching. Inside the clubhouse, warm light spilled from a single office window. Through the glass, Jules could see her. Elena. Everyone knew Elena. She was the wife of Big Marcus, the Hells Angels president. She wasn't a biker herself, but she was the heart of the club. She ran the toy drives, the food banks, the legal defense funds. Tonight, she looked peaceful, sitting at a large oak desk, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, unaware that death was rolling toward her on four wheels. Jules scanned the street. It was quiet. Too quiet. Then a black sedan rolled around the corner. Its headlights were off. Jules's breath hitched. It was a nondescript car, the kind that vanished in traffic. It crawled down the street, the engine a low hum, and pulled up to the curb directly opposite the clubhouse window. The driver's door didn't open. The passenger door did. A man stepped out. He wore a long dark trench coat and a beanie pulled low, but as he passed under the flickering street lamp, Jules saw it. The snake tattoo on the neck. It was Viper. He didn't look like a bully now. He looked like an executioner. He moved with a terrifying calm, reaching into his coat. He pulled out a pistol with a long cylindrical suppressor screwed onto the barrel. He raised the weapon, aiming directly at the window where Elena was laughing at something on her phone. Jules looked around. No police. No pedestrians. No angels. The street was a vacuum. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped her legs. If she stayed quiet, she lived. If she moved, she died. It was the law of the street. Sometimes courage is just refusing to look away when everyone else does. Jules looked at Elena. The woman looked so warm, so safe. She looked like the mother Jules had lost. Screw the law of the street. Jules dropped her backpack. The distance between the auto shop and the clubhouse was perhaps 40 yards. To Jules, it looked like a mile. Viper took a two-handed stance, steadying his aim. Jules bolted. Her wet sneakers slapped against the asphalt, splashing through puddles. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have a plan. She only had her voice, which hadn't been used for anything but whispers in days. Gun! The scream tore from her throat, raw and shrill. It shattered the silence of the night. Lady, get down. Gun. Viper flinched. He spun around, his eyes widening as he saw a small, ragged figure sprinting toward him from the darkness. For a split second, confusion clouded his killer instinct. He hadn't expected a witness, certainly not a teenage girl charging him like a kamikaze. That second was all that mattered. Inside the office, Elena's head snapped up at the sound of the scream. She saw the girl running in the street, frantically waving her arms, and then she saw the man in the trench coat turning back toward the window. Elena didn't hesitate. She dropped from her chair, disappearing behind a heavy oak desk just as Viper corrected his aim and pulled the trigger. Fut, fut, fut. 3 rounds punched through the plate glass window. Shards rained down onto the desk where Elena's head had been a moment before. The bullets embedded themselves in the far wall, tearing into the plaster. Damn it, Viper snarled. He swung the gun toward Jules. Jules was exposed in the middle of the street. She saw the black bore the silencer turn her way. She tried to skid to a stop, to dive behind a parked car, but her worn soles slipped on an oil patch. She crashed hard onto the pavement, scraping her palms raw. Viper raised the gun to finish the witness. Clang. The steel side door of the clubhouse exploded outward. It wasn't Elena. It was the security detail. 2 massive men, Tank and Rook, who had been in the back room, burst onto the sidewalk. They didn't have guns drawn yet, but they were moving with the momentum of freight trains. Police. Viper didn't yell. He just scrambled back into the sedan. Go. Go. The driver floored it. Tires squealed, smoke billowing as the black car peeled away, disappearing around the corner just as Rook raised a massive revolver. He didn't fire. The street was too dark, the risk of hitting a house too high. Clear. Tank roared, scanning the street. He turned back to the window. Elena, I'm okay. Her voice came from inside, shaken but strong. I'm down, but I'm okay. Rook lowered his weapon and looked at the street. In the middle of the road, curled into a ball, lay a pile of wet gray clothes. Check the kid, Rook barked. Jules squeezed her eyes shut as heavy boots approached. She waited for the kick. She waited for the anger. Instead, a hand the size of a catcher's mitt gently touched her shoulder. Hey, a deep voice rumbled. You hit, kid. Jules opened her eyes. Rook, a bearded giant with tattoos covering his skull, was kneeling beside her. His face wasn't angry. It was concerned. Ah, I tripped, she stammered, shivering so hard her teeth clicked. You got a death wish, running a shooter like that? Tank asked, walking over. He looked terrifying, but he took off his leather cut and draped it over Jules's soaking shoulders. The vest was heavy, warm, and smelled of tobacco and safety. He was going to kill her, Jules chattered. The front door of the clubhouse opened, and Elena ran out. She ignored the glass on the sidewalk. She pushed past the giant bikers and knelt in the rain beside Jules. Oh my God, Elena whispered, brushing wet hair out of Jules's face. You saved me. You barely look old enough to drive. Is he gone? Jules asked weakly. He's gone, Elena said, her eyes fierce. She looked up at Tank. Get her inside. No. Lock it down. And call Marcus. The inside of the Hells Angels clubhouse was nothing like the cold bridge. It was a cavern of warmth, smelling of polished wood and leather. The main bar area was empty, pool tables covered. They brought Jules into the back lounge. Elena sat her on a plush leather sofa and wrapped a wool blanket around her, over Tank's vest. Someone shoved a mug of hot cocoa into her hands. Jules held the mug with both hands, the heat seeping into her frozen palms. She felt lightheaded. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her exhausted. Eat, Elena said, placing a plate of sandwiches on the table. You look like you haven't eaten in a week. Jules didn't argue. She wolfed down a sandwich in 3 bites. Rook and Tank stood by the door, arms crossed, watching her. They weren't hostile, but they were wary. In their world, nothing was free, and strangers were rarely what they seemed. Who are you? Rook asked. You got a name? Jules, she said, swallowing a mouthful of bread. Where are you from, Jules? Around. Around isn't a zip code, Tank grunted. You a runaway? Jules looked down at the hot chocolate. Does it matter? It matters if the cops come looking for you while we're trying to handle a war, Tank said. Leave her alone, Elena snapped. She sat next to Jules, taking her hand. She saved my life. That's all that matters right now. Suddenly, the heavy steel door at the front of the building slammed open. The vibration rattled the glasses behind the bar. Elena! The roar was primal. Heavy boots thundered across the floorboards. Big Marcus filled the doorway of the lounge. The president of the Hells Angels chapter was 6'5" of muscle and scar tissue. He had a beard like a Viking and eyes that burned with blue fire. He looked like a man who could tear a car door off its hinges, which rumor had it he actually had done once. He scanned the room, saw Elena safe, and let out a breath that sounded like a deflating tire. He rushed over, dropping to his knees, a position no other man had ever seen him in, and buried his face in her hands. I thought the text said shots fired. Marcus choked out. I'm fine, Marcus. I'm fine. Elena soothed him, stroking his hair. But look who helped. Marcus lifted his head. He looked at Jules. His gaze was intense, analyzing every inch of her, the dirty sneakers, the bruises on her cheek, the fear in her eyes. This is her, Marcus asked, standing up. He towered over the sofa. She saw the shooter. She screamed. If she hadn't, Elena didn't finish the sentence. Marcus stared at Jules for a long, uncomfortable silence. Then he extended a hand. Thank you, he said. His voice was gravel, but sincere. Jules hesitantly shook his hand. It engulfed hers. Did you see him? Marcus asked, his tone shifting from gratitude to business. The shooter. Did you see his face? Jules nodded. I saw him. And I know who he is. The room went deadly silent. Who? Marcus demanded. He had a snake tattoo on his neck. His friends called him Viper. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rook and Tank exchanged a dark look. Marcus's face hardened into a mask of pure rage. The veins in his neck bulged. Viper, Marcus whispered the name like a curse. The Snake Riders. They actually did it. They broke the truce. They were talking, Jules added, her voice small. Under the bridge. He said, the Queen is alone. He said if they broke you, the club would crumble. Marcus turned away, pacing the room like a caged tiger. They targeted Elena. Civilians are off limits. That's the rule. They tried to execute my wife to send a message. He stopped pacing and looked at Tank. How many brothers are in town? Maybe 20. The rest are at the run in Daytona. 20 isn't enough, Marcus said. If Viper missed, he knows he's a dead man walking. He won't run. He'll try to finish it before we can regroup. He'll bring the whole nest. You think they'll hit the clubhouse? Elena asked, her hand flying to her mouth. I know they will, Marcus said grimly. They're desperate. They want the territory, and they want me dead. He pulled out his phone. What are you doing? Jules asked. Marcus looked at her, and a dark, dangerous grin spread across his face. I'm making a phone call. An hour passed. The atmosphere in the clubhouse was suffocating. Jules was moved to a safer room in the center of the building, but she refused to stay there. She sat near the front, watching the security monitors with Rook. They're here, Rook said quietly, pointing to a grainy black and white screen. Outside, the street was filling up. Not with cars, but with bikes. Cheap, souped-up sports bikes and rat bikes. The Snake Riders. There were at least 50 of them. They parked in a semicircle around the front of the clubhouse, revving their engines, a swarm of angry hornets. They were blocking the exits. They were shouting, brandishing chains and bats. A few openly carried shotguns. Viper stood at the front, illuminated by the clubhouse security lights. He looked manic. Marcus! Viper screamed, his voice amplified by the quiet street. Send out the bitch. We know you're in there. We burn this place to the ground. Inside, Marcus stood by the door, holding a heavy iron bar. There were only 15 Hell's Angels present. They were tough, seasoned fighters, but they were outnumbered 3-1. They're going to rush us, Tank said, checking the magazine of his pistol. We can hold the choke points, but if they use Molotovs... Jules felt a surge of guilt. This is my fault, she whispered to Elena. If I hadn't run in here, if you hadn't ran in here, I'd be dead, Elena said firmly, tightening her grip on Jules's shoulder. Don't you ever apologize for saving a life. But they're going to kill everyone. You think this is the first time we've been outnumbered? Elena smiled, a strange, confident smile. You don't know the Angels, honey. We don't fight alone. But Marcus said everyone is in Daytona, Jules said. Daytona is a long ride, Elena admitted. But we have neighbors. Outside, a bottle smashed against the brickwork. Flames licked up the wall. Come out, Marcus, Viper yelled. Or we come in. And give us the rat, too. I want the girl. Jules shrank back. He knew she was here. Marcus turned to the door. He didn't look scared. He looked patient. He checked his watch. Open the door, Marcus said. Boss. Tank looked at him like he was crazy. Open it. I want to look him in the eye. Tank hesitated, then hit the release. The heavy steel door groaned open. Marcus stepped out onto the concrete porch. He didn't bring a gun. He just stood there, arms crossed, staring down at the mob of 50 armed gang members. The Snake Riders quieted down, unnerved by his presence. You got a lot of nerve, Viper, Marcus called out, his voice calm and booming. Coming to my house, threatening my wife. The old ways are dead, old man, Viper shouted, waving his pistol. This is our town now. You're outnumbered. You're finished. Am I? Marcus tilted his head. Look around you. Viper gestured to his crew. 50 guns. You got what? 10 old men inside. Give up the girl and your cut, and maybe we let you live. Marcus laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You snakes never were good at math, Marcus said. What? You counted my bikes, Marcus said, pointing to the empty parking spots. But you didn't check the highway. As if on cue, the ground began to vibrate. It started as a low hum, like a distant earthquake. Then it became a growl. Then a roar. Viper looked around confused. What is that? The sound grew louder, drowning out the Snake Riders' engines. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of the Snake Riders' sports bikes. It was the deep, chest-thumping thunder of American V-twin engines. Headlights appeared at the end of the street. 2, then 4, then 10, then 100. They came from the east. They came from the west. Jersey chapter. Marcus listed them off as the lights flooded the street. New York City chapter. Long Island. Newark. Philly. The street was suddenly blinded by a sea of HID headlights. The roar was deafening, shaking the glass in the windows. The The snake riders turned their bikes around, but the other end of the street was blocked too. More bikes. Hundreds of them. I made a call, Marcus shouted over the noise, looking at a pale-faced Viper. I told him someone touched my wife. I told him someone threatened a child under my protection. The Hells Angels poured into the block. They didn't just fill the street, they filled the sidewalks, the alleys. It wasn't 50 men. It was 1,000. 1,000 leather-clad bikers, wearing the Death's Head patch, rolled to a stop, enclosing the snake riders in a cage of chrome and steel. The silence that followed when they cut their engines was heavier than the noise. 1,000 men stood up, kickstands down. They didn't yell. They just stared. It was a wall of brotherhood, tidal wave of loyalty. Viper dropped his gun. It clattered loudly on the pavement. His crew shrank back, dropping chains and bats. They were suddenly very small, very young, and very stupid. Marcus walked down the steps, slowly. The sea of angels parted for him. He walked right up to Viper. "You wanted to send a message?" Marcus asked softly. Viper was trembling. He looked at the 1,000 men surrounding him. He looked at Marcus. "It was just business," Viper stammered. Marcus punched him. It was a single, clean right hook. Viper's jaw audibly cracked, and he crumpled to the pavement like a sack of laundry. He didn't get up. Marcus looked at the rest of the snake riders. "Get him out of here. If I ever see a snake patch in this state again, there won't be a conversation." The snake riders didn't need to be told twice. They dragged their unconscious leader onto a bike and scrambled to leave. The Hells Angels didn't move to stop them. They just stood there, a silent gauntlet of judgment. The snakes had to ride through the narrow path between the rows of angels, heads down, humiliated, defeated without a single shot being fired by the reinforcements. They had been crushed by the weight of their own insignificance. By dawn, the police had come and gone. They took statements, but strangely, no one had seen much. Just a disagreement, Marcus had told the sheriff. The sheriff, seeing the 1,000 bikers camped out in the street, decided that as long as no bodies were left behind, he'd file the report later. The street was a block party now. The brothers from other chapters were drinking coffee, eating donuts brought in by the truckload, and slapping backs. Inside the clubhouse, the mood was celebratory, but quiet in the back room. Jules sat on the couch, still wrapped in Tank's vest. She felt like she was in a dream. Marcus entered the room, followed by Elena and a few of the chapter presidents from New York and Philly. "Jules," Marcus said. Jules stood up quickly. "I should go. I don't want to be in the way." "Thank you for the food." "Sit down," Marcus said gently. Jules sat. "You know what we are?" Marcus asked. "Bikers." "We're a family," Marcus corrected. "We live by code, loyalty, respect, and we protect our own." He looked at Elena, then back to Jules. "You stood up when everyone else would have run. You ran toward the gun. You saved the most important person in my world." Marcus reached into his pocket. "We had a meeting. The brothers voted." He pulled out a patch. It wasn't the big Death's Head patch. That was for members only. This was smaller, rectangular, black with red stitching. It had white wings and the words Guardian Angel. "We don't give these out," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "This means you're under our protection. Anywhere in the world, you see a Death's Head, you show them this, and you're safe. You're family." He handed the patch to Jules. She ran her thumb over the embroidery. It felt real. "I don't have anywhere to put it," Jules whispered. "My backpack is." She remembered her muddy, broken bag under the bridge. "We know," Elena said. "We sent a prospect to get your stuff. He found this." Elena held out her hand. In her palm lay the silver locket. Jules gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "You found it." "But he threw it in the river." "Prospects are good at finding things," Marcus grinned. "Kid spent 2 hours waiting in the mud, but he got it." Jules took the locket, popping it open. The picture of her mom was wet, but still there. She burst into tears. For the first time in 3 years, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. "Now," Marcus said, clapping his hands together. "Business." He pointed to a man in a suit standing by the door. "That's Briefcase. He's our lawyer. He's the best in the state. He's going to handle your foster situation. You are not going back to that house where they hurt you. And Elena added, we have a garage apartment behind our house. It's warm. It has a lock. It's yours. As long as you need it. No, Orin. You just have to finish school. Jules looked at them, these leather-clad giants, these outlaws that the world feared. She looked at Marcus, the man who had crushed a gang with a phone call. She looked at Elena, who looked at her like a daughter. She thought about the bridge, the cold, the invisibility. Why? Jules asked. I'm just a runaway. Marcus leaned down, resting his hands on his knees so he was eye level with her. Because you're not a runaway anymore, Jules. You're the girl who stood your ground. 6 months later. The morning air was crisp and smelled of pine. Jules walked out of the high school gates, her backpack heavy with books. A group of kids were hanging out by the curb, laughing. One of them, a bully who used to torment her for her old shoes, sneered as she walked by. Hey, trash, the boy called out. Where's your shopping cart? Jules stopped. She didn't look down. She didn't flinch. She turned and looked him dead in the eye. Before she could speak, a low rumble shook the pavement. A polished black Harley-Davidson rolled up to the curb. Tank was riding it, looking like a mountain in sunglasses. He revved the engine, a sound that made the bully jump a foot in the air. Tank nodded at Jules. Ready to go, kid? Elena's making lasagna. Jules smiled. She reached into her pocket and touched the patch sewn onto her new denim jacket. Yeah, Jules said, climbing onto the back of the bike. I'm ready. She looked back at the bully, whose mouth was hanging open. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. As they roared off down the highway, Jules didn't look back. She watched the road ahead, stretching out toward the horizon, bright and open. She wasn't running away anymore. She was riding home.